So a big welcome back to the Resources Conservation and Recycling webinar program. My name is Mitchell Jones. I'm the Outreach Editor at Resources Conservation and Recycling. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, and we're blessed with the presence of Andrea and Alessandro. I'll be introducing them in just a moment. I would just like to touch on a few points on the program before we begin. So this is the English language resources conservation and recycling webinar program. We also have a Chinese language webinar program for people who are potentially interested in that, but this is the English language version. It's run at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific time every second Thursday. And the scope of this program is pretty much matching that of the journal. So you can expect from our webinar program a fairly balanced program that doesn't have any topic-specific bias. We are running webinars across the full breadth of the scope of the journal. The one point that we do really emphasize is audience accessibility. So we do want the program to be something that everybody can take something away from. Resources conservation and recycling, although you could say it has quite a narrow scope, you could also say it has quite a broad scope. And there are quite a lot of different disciplines across that narrow scope, which make it a little tricky sometimes, although they are all adjacent to each other. Sometimes you're not necessarily entirely familiar with the ins and outs of an adjacent discipline. So we do ask that the webinars avoid too much subject-specific or research area-specific terminology, and that there is some kind of basic introductory content to the research area before the actual more nitty-gritty details are covered. You can register for the program using the links that are provided in the Resources Conservation and Recycling newsletter that's circulated at the end of every month. You can also register using the links on the social media pages. You can find them on X, on LinkedIn, and also on Facebook. Additionally, we do also have the webinar calendar on the journal homepage. So if you go to the Elsevier journal homepage for Resources Conservation and Recycling, and you go to the About tab and go to the webinar calendar, you will find all of the links there for the upcoming webinars, in addition to links from all of the previous webinars. So you can find all of our former speakers there and links to their webinars, which are all archived to YouTube. You can visit YouTube directly to view those webinars also, youtube.com/@RCR journal. You can find all of our content archived to YouTube there. The final point is that we do want to build the program to your preferences. It's a program that we run for our research community, and we want your feedback on whether we're doing a good job, things that are working well, things that could be improved, etc. At the end of this webinar, as is with every webinar, if you have joined us through Zoom, you will have the opportunity to fill out a survey where you can provide some feedback on things that we can improve in our program. We do take that feedback very seriously. It's 8 questions. It will only take you a couple of minutes to complete if you do have the time to do that. Okay, so I'm going to bring up my my screen now so that I can show you our program for today. So we've had our welcome address. I'm going to provide a short introduction to the journal, followed by an introduction to our speakers for today. Then a few notes, brief notes on the admin side of things. We're going to then have our 20-minute presentation, followed by 10 minutes of question time, a few notes on the next information, and some closing remarks. So the journal is Resources Conservation and Recycling. Hopefully you're already all familiar with the journal. It's an Elsevier journal, quite a prestigious Elsevier journal. And I think that the scope is quite apparent from the name. We are interested in everything resources, conservation, and recycling. The key points are systems-wide strategies, technological, economic, institutional, and policy focus, resource management practices, conservation, recycling, and resource substitution, resource productivity improvement, restructuring of production and consumption profiles, and transformation of industry. A few brief notes on the webinar etiquette, the admin side of things. Please, all communication in English. This is just so that we have a common bridging language that we can all understand each other in this event. We do have closed captions available. They're running currently. You should see them popping up on your screen. Those may be quite useful to you if you perhaps want to watch the webinar without sound, or if perhaps English is not your first language and you would benefit from some captioning. So feel very free to use those if you would like to do so. We very much encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A during the presentation. That's why we're all here at this live event. So if you have any questions, be sure to have your say and ask our great speakers any questions that you might have over the course of the presentation. If you see someone else ask a question that you think is particularly good and is something that you might have asked, be sure to upload it also so that we can get to it a little sooner in the question time. We also offer the capability that if you would like to speak directly to our speakers, so you'd like to join us on the floor with your camera and microphone and speak with the speakers, ask your question in person, you're very welcome to do that. You just need to indicate that you would like to do that by raising your hand, the raised hand emoticon in your toolbar. And if we have enough time, we'll be very pleased to invite you onto the floor to speak with Andrea and Alessandro. Okay, so our speakers for today, we're very fortunate to have with us two speakers. Andrea URBINATI is our first speaker from LIUC Università, Cattaneo in Italy. He and his colleague Alessandro are going to be speaking on the topic of SME transition towards circular economy by means of circular supply chains. Andrea URBINATI, PhD, is a Senior Assistant Professor of Sustainability and Circular Economy at the School of Industrial Engineering of LIUC, Università, Cattaneo, Italy. His research interests concern the fields of sustainability and circular economy with a focus on the design of new business models. He is Deputy Director of LIUC's Green Transition Hub and a member of the core faculty of LIUC Business School, LIUC's School of Management. Andrea has more than 90 publications, including articles in international journals, books, and book chapters, national and international conferences. Andrea is associate editor in several scientific journals and ordinary member of the International Society for Circular Economy. In 2023, he was included in the world's top 2% of scientists in the list drawn up annually by Stanford University. Thank you so much for being with us, Andrea. He is joined by Alessandro CREAZZA, also from the same university. Alessandro CREAZZA, PhD, is Associate Professor of Logistics and Supply Chain Management at the School of Industrial Engineering of LIUC Università, Cattaneo, Italy, and a visiting fellow in the Faculty of Business, Law and Politics at the University of Hull, UK. He has developed a vast knowledge and experience in the field of logistics and supply chain management, combining academic qualifications with professional experience. He is director of LIUC's Green Transition Hub and coordinator of the PhD program in Management Accounting and Finance at LIUC Università Cattaneo. He is author of more than 90 publications at international and national level and is part of the reviewers board of several journals of the sector. So a very big welcome to both Andrea and Alessandro. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I'll now stop sharing my screen so that you're able to share yours.
Thank you, Mitchell, for the kind invitation and for the kind presentation. I'm sharing my screen. I hope you are able to see it. Okay, so what we are going to present today is part of, I would say, a research that we conduct in our competence center, that is the LIUC Green Transition Hub, which is a competence center where Alessandro and I cover respectively the charge of director and deputy director, and the competence center was created in a couple of years, I would say, to push our activity, research activity, advisory activity, and etc. in the sustainability and circular economy transition from several perspectives, I would say: supply chain management, business model, innovation, logistics, and etc. This is I would say part of the research that we conducted in our university, and this is especially the result of a publication that we were able to, I would say, reach in resources conservation and recycling a few months ago. And together with us, there are the colleagues Maria Concetta Carissimi and Mario Fontanella Pisa, who were part, I would say, of the co-authorship team. The why we decided to deal with this topic, because Italy is, first of all, I would say, the industrial, I would say, sector of Italy is mostly done by small, medium enterprise companies, and both myself and Alessandro work in the circular economy field, so we try to explore how this circular economy approach is in some way affecting the way small, medium enterprise companies are running their business activity. So I will try to go a bit faster in the first, I would say, slides, because these are more, I would say, theoretical one, so and more conceptual one, and I think that many of the I would say participants in the audience know, I would say, the field we are talking about. So you know that the linear model has to be, I would say, has to be changed in some way, because it is based on the assumption that the resources are infinite ones, okay? But we realized definitely that this is not true. So there is a matter to, I would say, satisfy the economic production, trying to reuse in some way the resources that are currently available into the market. So the circular economy approach is a new approach that is trying in some way to substitute this take, make, dispose linear model characterizing our economy. The main, I would say, representation of the circular economy is the butterfly diagram realized by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We know that there are in the field a lot of, I would say, circular economy definition. A colleague of us, Julian Kirker, published a paper highlighting that there are at least 114 definitions in scientific research about circular economy, but I would say that we may agree that this I would say circular economy approach consists in transforming in some way the way in which company use resources, replacing, I would say, the traditional linear consumption model with a closed, I would say, production systems where resources are reused, and reused again, trying to maintain them in a, I would say, closed production system. And the butterfly diagram in some way tries to visualize this model, because in the central part we have the linear model that can be in some way overcome by creating these loops. On the left one we have the green ones, so the biological ones, so the idea that in creating the loops we have to think about the impact that this approach has to the environment. And on the other end, so the right side, we have the technical loops that represent in some way the kind of the actions, the practices that companies can implement to, I would say, put in practice the circular economy principles. We have realized in some way that this approach is very complex in some way to be achieved. So what the scientific research has recently highlighted is that single companies cannot do the transition towards this approach alone. So there is a matter of collaboration. And when a collaboration takes place in a circular economy transition, it can be, I would say, understood as the realization of a circular supply chain. So in circular supply chain, what we usually have is, I would say, a new way to create value, okay? That can emerge, for example, from leasing or service approaches instead of, I would say, ownership. So Also, there is this concept of extended producer responsibility in some way. So the producer maintains the property, I would say, of the product, and in this way, when it comes the end of life of a product, there is no more the final customer that decides for the end of the product, but the product has to be taken back by the producer. So in this way, we are able in some way to create this cycle between the customer and the producer. And if we enlarge, I would say, this relationship among several players in the chain, we can create multiple loops that realize this circular, I would say, supply chain, this circular supply chain approach. So our focus is on how circular supply chains in some way can be enabled by the implementation of circular economy practices, and our unit, I would say, of observation is the small medium enterprises. The why we decided to focus on small medium enterprises, because they represent the 99% of companies operating in the European Union, with an important impact for what concerns the resource consumption, the greenhouse gas emissions, and several, I would say, negative environmental impact or negative externalities to the environment. And the why we decided to focus on the Italian context, because as I already anticipated in the introduction, because the industrial, I would say, sector of Italy is mostly characterized by small, medium enterprise companies. So our research question, or the research question guiding our, I would say, research is the one that you find in the slide. So how do small, medium, I would say, enterprises enable circular supply chains through the implementation of circular economy practices? So our idea is also to understand how the small, medium enterprise companies collaborate, I would say, in the industrial concept, in the industrial context, by implementing, I would say, circular economy principle. In which way we try to address this research question in two ways. The first one is the one that I'm going to present. The second one will be presented by Alessandro. But the first thing that we tried to do was to, I would say, reach a reliable, I would say, sample of small, medium enterprise companies operating in the Italian sector. So we leverage this, I would say, platform that is called the Atlas, I would say, of the circular economy. Within this platform, there are really a lot of companies. If I'm not wrong, there are more than 250 companies that are listed in this platform. And these companies are listed according to several information: the year of foundation, the activities, the location, the sites, and etc. We selected really the 100 companies within this sample that we thought, we did think they could represent a very good sample to address our research question. So what you find in this, I would say, graph is the distribution of these 100 companies in the Italian country. Let me clarify that these 100 small medium enterprises have less than 250 employees, and they are distributed, I would say, in Italy, with a greater concentration in the regions that are in the northern part of the country, which is also in line, I would say, with the business geography of Italy in some way. And the other interesting thing is I would say, the distribution of the sector. We have, if I'm not wrong, 14, I would say, different industry that characterize the sample of 100 companies that we selected. So mostly, I would say, heterogeneous. Okay. So now I leave the floor to Alessandro to continue. And I move the slides.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks a lot. What we did, we tried to map the practices of circular economy adopted by our sample companies according to this framework. This framework was composed of different dimensions of analysis. On one axis, basically, we wanted to improve the understanding of how companies adopted circular economy practices according to the representation of the butterfly diagram. So the biological cycles with the different practices included in them, and the technical cycles. So again, the 5 main cycles or activities companies can produce. And on the other side, we wanted to understand at what level of the supply chain companies were able to adopt these kind of circular practices. So if internally, the company at the product level, at the supply chain level, or even outside their own supply chain through the industrial symbiosis approach. And we did the same for both the biological cycles and the technical cycles. That's a distribution of the practices adopted by the sampled companies. As you can clearly see from this bar chart, it is evident that the 2 main practices that have been adopted by our sampled companies in the biological cycles, the extraction or the use of biochemical feedstock had the most widespread adoption. And with reference to the technical cycles instead, as you can see, the recycling practice has been the one most adopted by our companies. If you look at the bottom part of this bar chart, you can see that those practices like the reuse, the redistribution, share, refurbishing, and remanufacturing were the least adopted. And we're going to understand why in a minute. It's basically because they involve also other players, and small and medium enterprises are showing to struggle to include also other players in the chain for adopting these kind of practices. Next, please. Right. So if you do the breakdown of these practices by sector, according to the biological cycles, as you can see, there are some sectors which are quite advanced in adopting these kind of practices. But again, let me say the main information is confirmed. That is to say, there are 2 main categories of practices adopted by companies, by the surveyed small and medium enterprises. And this shows again how there are different levels of maturity across the industrial sector in Italy, with the agri-food, the chemical, and the basic materials to be the most advanced one and mature in this sense, while other sectors like let me say, for example, the construction sector is very immature regarding the adoption of circular economy practices. If we look at the technical cycles, again, the situation is still confirmed, as mentioned. So as you can see, the recycling activity is the one that really is most adopted, widely adopted, and often adopted by companies. Also, in this case, you can see there's a lot of companies in the Italian industry adopting recycling practices, but also because that's for historical reasons. Italy, you probably know, is very strong in the recycling sector. That's for traditional historical reason. The recycling industry in Italy has been developed over time for at least, I would say, 50 years. So it's one of the main industries across Europe. The problem is this is not really a circular economy approach. It's more like an economy of recycling. So still the industrial sector in Italy needs to evolve towards more advanced practices and just leaving behind the traditional recycling approaches. But again, this shows how companies are really focusing on that kind of practice, especially because they can do that by themselves. Next, please. Right. Now, if we take those practices and we map them against the different levels of the supply chain, you can see that the majority of these practices are adopted at a company in a product or process level with very little, very few companies succeeding in adopting also these practices across the different layers of their supply chain, or even going beyond their supply chain according to the industrial symbiosis approach. And this shows how it is hard for them to be able to succeed in this kind of extension of the reach beyond the boundaries of their own organizations. So we said, right, now we have a good overview of the adoption of the practices across the sector. We wanted to delve deeper and understand in a more precise way the mechanisms behind the adoption of those practices. For doing this, we conducted a multiple case study analysis. So we selected a subsample of the surveyed companies for asking questions about the drivers, the barriers, the facilitating or hindering factors, and the mechanisms behind the adoption of those practices. For doing this, we selected 9 companies out of the 100 companies we surveyed, and we tried to be exhaustive by picking up companies that, first of all, showed a widespread adoption of practices and that covered the majority of the sectors we had in our sample. In terms of practices, what did the company tell us? Well, it was very simple. Majority of the findings in this sense were confirmation of what emerged from the quantitative analysis from the survey. Practices as reused redistribution, where the focus is on the shift to the supply chain level beyond the single level of organization, were the hardest to be adopted because of limitations in their outreach. The majority of the practices adopted by companies were in the outer loops of the butterfly diagram explained before earlier by Andrea. The ones that are less advanced, if you want, and the ones that can also happen without involving necessarily also the other players in the supply chain. In fact, 5 companies out of 9 in our sample declared they were able to implement circular economy practices individually, so alone, basically. The other 4 say, yes, they tried to take the initiative, but they had to rely on the external network of collaborations to initiate the process of adopting these practices, and to rely also on the resources of the other companies in the network for making sure that these practices could really be adopted. So that was one of the main findings we found from the case study analysis. In terms of enablers, certainly we could highlight 3 main categories of enablers, facilitating factors. The first one, which is quite obvious, but not maybe so obvious, is collaboration with stakeholders. So having the possibility to establish a network of companies working all together towards the same objective, with somebody also in the network championing the adoption of these practices, was considered probably the most important facilitating factor for adopting circular economy practices. The other one was we need to have visibility of supply and demand for circular products or materials. It's hard for a company to start embracing the concept of circular economy practices across the supply chain if it is not well known where the demand of these circular products and the supply of these circular products are. So we discussed with our interviewees that brokerage or intermediation platforms can be really an enabling factor that can make it easier for companies to meet buyers and suppliers and be able to share and sell and exchange these circular products in terms of products and byproducts as well. And then again, a shift and change in the mindset, in the business management processes was absolutely necessary. In terms of long-term vision, different mindset to look not just for the economic impact, but also environmental, social impact, and long-term implications of this transition towards the circular economy, instead of just focusing on individual initiatives and especially on single practices alone. In terms of barriers, well, these were sort of corroboration what we found in terms of enablers. So we found that financial, bureaucratic, and regulatory elements are really perceived as the barriers to the adoption of circular economy. First of all, small and medium enterprises find it very hard to get funding from credit institutions. It's hard for them to get also the interest of stakeholders to invest in these innovative ideas because of the perception of very high risk in terms of initial investment for developing these new initiatives. The same applies to the credit lines. At the moment, our interviewees perceive the existing mechanisms for getting credit from banks and credit institutions to be not adequate for their own needs for going, let me say, the extra mile and take the initiatives for exploring the circular economy practices across the supply chain especially. And regulation is also seen as a barrier because the ever-changing nature of some rules and regulation and laws, it's a sort of obstacle to provide, let me say, a consistency of action across time and provide also confidence in the investor that what they're going to invest in will produce a good outcome because it is compliant with regulation. So in this way, we can say that bureaucratic factors, together with regulation, have a, so let me say, a dampening effect, because they kind of break and slow down the capacity of small and medium enterprises to work and experiment. So it's hard for them if they don't have a streamlined process. So in terms of implication and conclusion, what we learn, it was very simple. Small and medium enterprises only partially realize or contribute in the realization of circular supply chains because they need to have a more holistic view and to embrace a systemic approach to the adoption of these circular economy practices. And this can happen only if they break the silos and they go beyond the boundaries of their own organizations. This can be facilitated by the presence of intermediation platforms and digital technologies as well, for improving the match of supply and demand, providing visibility, and facilitating the development of networks of companies across the same supply chain, but also across different supply chains that cross among each other. So we need to have a focus on helping small and medium companies to develop collaborative relationships in terms of networking building as well, fostering the adoption of digital technologies, and doing a sort of push towards the development of appropriate financial and regulatory instruments to help this kind of transition. But first of all, this can happen if small and medium enterprises have the right company culture to embrace this kind of transition. Okay, so thanks a lot for listening. So that was the content of our presentation.
I interrupt the screen, Mitch. What do you think?
Yes, maybe yes, there we go. Now everyone can see your faces as you answer the questions. So I will just note that the opportunity to ask questions has come. So be sure to ask your questions now. I see already that there are a couple there, but just to give people a chance to ask their to think about what they might want to ask and to ask their questions there, I will ask a couple of questions myself that I had here. Although this is not my research area, so I'm going to play the devil's advocate. So my first question was going to be about what kind of companies you actually looked at in Italy, but you actually showed this very nicely in this pie chart. So then what I kind of thought was, how generically applicable are these results that you found in Italy? So the results that you found, I assume that the ramifications and the setup and such and the conditions would depend on the type of the company. So how reflective is your Italian study of, say, a broader EU or an American? How applicable are the results to other countries and regions? Is it mostly for Italy, or it could be applied to other countries also? Sorry.
Andrea, would you like me to provide the answer, or would you like
Okay.
I can say, the geography of business in Italy and the composition of the industrial sector is kind of similar to what happens in the major other European economies. Also because Italy is part of the group of 7. So clearly it has a representation of the other big, let me say, manufacturing countries across Europe. I think instead, so our results can be representative in terms of issues, in terms of regulatory problems of the continental Europe especially. I'm not sure about the US, to be honest. In fact, it's one of the limitations that we pointed out in our study, saying that probably we could replicate, the geographical regions like the US, for example, this sort of study, and understand if there are commonalities or differences in the results, for sure.
Yeah, let me add, Mitch, that given the fact that within this sample of 100 companies, we are covering 14 different manufacturing sectors.
Which is quite impressive, yeah, quite a broad range.
So we always say, especially for qualitative, you'd say, studies, that qualitative studies, you'd say the results of qualitative studies are a bit difficult to generalize, you'd say. But the fact that we were able to cover a good, I would say, high number of industries in the same country gave us, I would say, the good, I would say, feeling for saying that might be the most part of small medium enterprises, maybe not only in Italy but also in Europe, might behave in the same way and are struggling, I would say, with implementation of the same practices and with the same, I would say, issues or problems due to policy making, regulation, bureaucracy, and etc.
Very nice. The other thing I wanted to ask you was, so you said in your slides there, you mentioned that there are some successful examples of large enterprises that have gone circular. I was just interested if maybe you could very briefly just describe a couple of these examples.
I mean, I mean, there are a lot of, I would say, big companies that have tried to that are considered, I would say, good example for the circular economy implementation. I think, for example, about IKEA with the Second Life project, or for example, Apple with reconditioned iPhones. Deso, which is a multinational company operating in the carpet manufacturing industry. What we noted was that big companies also have liquidity, you know. So given the fact that you have to invest, I would say, money for doing the circular economy transition, okay, small medium enterprises sometimes lack of, I would say, enough money, no? So when you ask a small medium enterprise to do the transition with its own, I would say, capabilities, sometimes it is quite difficult, you know, because also it is not only the issue of the regulation or bureaucracy, but it is also the issue of having, I would say, the liquidity for doing the investment. And consider that when you invest in a circular economy, the return on investment is not short. I would say you do not see it shortly in the short medium term, but you see it in the long term. Okay, so there is a matter of covering, I would say, in that time frame, the investment that the company has done. Okay, so I think that especially when talking about small medium enterprises, there is a matter to finding the right fit between doing the investment and generate a return on investment. Okay, I think I mean, at least this is my personal, I would say, point of view, but I think Alessandro.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can confirm what you said. I had recently a conversation with some managers from Procter & Gamble, so a big multinational company, and exactly the point of cash flow is crucial. Being able to have a good cash flow is great. It's a great enabler for them because they can invest in something which is not, as Andrea said, something that will provide a return on the short term, and especially with no absolute guarantee that what you invest in will produce a good return and quickly as well. So this is what really can make the difference, having the cash flow for investing in these kind of initiatives, along with partners in the supply chain. It's essential. So that's exactly what, especially in our opinion, gives the foundations of good examples of attempts made by large multinational companies in the adoption of successful circular economy practices.
So I'm almost scared to ask, but are there any incentives currently for companies to go circular?
It depends. In some sectors, I'm speaking for Italy, there are some kind of incentives that are more about changing, for example, the packaging, trying to provide, packaging from linear to circular. That's something that gets a bit of incentive, especially because now the European legislation is changing. So they have to comply with these kind of changes. And so for facilitating this transition, there are some incentives. Not enough, according to everybody you speak to in the industry. Also because they should go also on the long term, while sometimes these kind of incentives are very much on short time windows. That's something that can create some obstacles in the actual diffusion.
So do you guys have maybe some idea about what do you think would be a good way to incentivize companies to move toward the circular economy? Should they be getting some kind of tax rebates? Should they be getting some kind of, how should it work, do you think, would be your opinion?
Honest, then Andrea, I can leave it obvious to you, but together with my colleagues, we found that it's especially about regulation and especially how waste is distinguished from byproducts. That's essential. Because sometimes some parts that can be recovered or used out of your manufacturing process are classified as waste. So it cannot just be exchanged according to the traditional way you transfer products. If it is classified as a waste product, it has to go through a completely different process for being stored, transported, and all the documentation is much more heavy from the bureaucratic viewpoint. There's a lot of red tape for completing these kind of operations. And there is no clarity. So sometimes companies prefer just to get rid of something that could be a circular byproduct because they are afraid of doing something wrong by law and getting in trouble. You see what I mean? So I can tell you there are a lot of examples of small and medium enterprises. They just say, okay, hang on, I'm not going to do anything now because I don't want to incur any risk of doing something wrong because there was not enough clarity. Because the European Code of Waste Management doesn't provide enough, at the moment for now, doesn't provide enough clarity on what can be seen as a waste product and a byproduct. So the risk of doing something that goes against the law, and especially to get caught after a few months or year, it's a big disincentive to take new ventures in this sense.
So it's not only is there not incentives, there are actually disincentives
in some ways, yes. That's something that can create obstacles.
Yeah. What we think is I think and what we think is that maybe the regulation should move in some way to harmonize, the several concepts, the several I would say the several characteristics that in some way characterize this approach, because especially small medium enterprises are really bombed of several sustainability concept, ESG. You have the ESG, you have the SDGs, you have now the corporate social responsibility directive. You have a lot of sustainability addresses, okay, that contain also the circular economy, I would say, approach. But for example, the example that I made before, about a paper published by a colleague of us that highlights 114 definitions of circular economy, makes it difficult, especially for small medium enterprises, to follow, and to understand what really means implementing a circular economy approach and how to implement it properly and in a good way to not only, I would say, make sustainable the business of the company, but also I would say, the society at large in some way, So there is a need of an harmonization process, I would say, in some way, I think, of concepts and definitions.
I will also just take a moment to point out for the viewers that the paper that Andrea has referred to several times from Julian was actually a part of the webinar program about 6 weeks ago, approximately. So if you're interested in this paper, feel free to also check out this webinar, because the things that Andrea is referring to are based on this paper currently that he's speaking about. The other thing I wanted to ask you was, are there fundamental differences between circular economy models in a small, medium enterprise versus a larger one? Perhaps for people that don't know much about this kind of area, such as myself. What kind of fundamental differences are there?
Ale,
no, you go first. You can go first.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, also Alessandro highlighted during the presentation is that we found that especially the small medium enterprises when think about circular economy implementation, it is about recycling, no? Which is the outer cycle, you'd say, of the butterfly diagram. But I would say recycling, it is not a problem. Also, they are aware, I would say, that the recycling, I would say, is a practice, a circular economy practices that can be implemented. What we usually say is that the circular economy is not a recycling economy, okay? But this is something that might be more big companies have understood than small medium enterprises. So when you move from small medium enterprises to big companies, you see that there is no just the recycling, I would say, activity that is put in place, but big companies try also to move into the direction of the inner cycles of the butterfly diagram. So from recycling towards remanufacturing, for example, or refurbishing, or reconditioning, or reusing. So, and this is, I would say, might be related with the fact that there are some, I would say, internal, I would say, capability, resources, competencies that allow the big companies, I would say, to move into this direction more properly than small, medium enterprises in some way.
Definitely. The final question I'll ask before we go to our questions, because I see we people have had a chance to ask their questions, was I was curious in terms of the methodology, what survey methods you employed. I know that often it's important to be careful about what kind of questions you ask and how you phrase them, especially if you're asking a diverse group of people in order to avoid bias or to achieve good accuracy in your results. I was just interested if you wanted to make a comment briefly on your methodology.
Yeah, shall I go, Andre? Yeah. Okay. So for the survey, basically what we used was the internet-based search methodology. So it was the exploration of the published material on the websites of organizations. This was possible to be done because we got the information from the companies included in the Atlas of the Circular Economy. Those companies subscribing to that kind of public platform, they declare that what they do is what they publish on the website. They take this commitment. So being this the agreement they have to sign with the platform, they provide information on the website publishing what they do and what do they don't. Okay. So this way it was possible to use a common framework of data collection that was replicated across the full board of the 100 companies we surveyed, and we extracted the same kind of information from each of the company to enable a sort of cross view of what they did in terms of practices, and those practices were mapped against the framework we developed. Then in the second phase, we developed an interview questionnaire for the typical kind of case study methodology approach. The questions were taken from the literature based on what typically it is suggested to ask for barriers, mechanisms of adoption, and facilitating factors. And for this, we refer to the literature that's been published on the sector, and especially a few key publications that addressed the theme of small and medium enterprises. That's just to give you an overview.
Very nice. Was there something you wanted to add, Andrea, or you're happy?
For me, it's fine.
Excellent.
We use a mix, I would say, we use a mixed methodology in some way, also, given the important number of companies that we initially sampled, okay? So, and especially because we wanted to know not only, I would say, the geography, I would say, of the practices implemented, but really how these practices were implemented in this company. So we thought that this mixed methodology was quite effective for addressing our research.
Yeah, and also we assume the veracity of what they said and what they published, because obviously you cannot never be sure what somebody can tell you. You need to make an assumption, and because obviously you need to make an assumption about the truthfulness of what is being published. For doing this, basically, we spoke with the people compiling the platform, the Circular Economy Atlas, to see what kind of agreements and documents they signed with these companies publishing the material, to make sure that we were not collecting information that was not accurate or came from biased or misleading information provided to them. That was the idea. Then again, you don't have the crystal ball, but you have to make assumptions, of course.
Unfortunately, we would all like a crystal ball. Okay, so then I will shift across to the questions from the audience. The first one we have, hello, Dr. Marcus Ferrasso from Portugal. Could you please share the link of this paper on RCR? Thanks. Now I can send that to him, but for the sake of the video archive, it's probably better, maybe you guys can just say the name of your article so that if anyone wanted to look at it later and cannot see the text, they can Google it.
Okay. So the title, you mean the title of the paper?
Yes.
Yeah, so the title of the paper, to be precise, is Circular Economy Practices Enabling Circular Supply Chains, an empirical analysis of 100 SMEs in Italy.
Very nice.
That's the full title.
Thank you. The next question, of the 17 SDGs, which goals become the priority for most SMEs in Italy? I'd like to know the recent/current sustainable trend in Italy among the SMEs. Grazie mille.
Very good question. Very good question. I would say, at least from my perspective, I think the most important goal that the small medium enterprises are, I would say, working on is the number 12, maybe responsible production and consumption, because if you consume less and if you produce, I would say, better, you are more efficient. So being efficient means you reduce cost and you gain more marginalities. And I think that circular economy approach has to be conceived in this way. I mean, it is not only, I would say, something that helps company to being more efficient and reduce costs, but also offers opportunities for, I would say, new flows of revenues, for example, because in the latest years, we also saw, I would say, the growth of new companies that were born with the circular model. Okay, so these are also examples that I would say tells us that, okay, the circular economy can really, I would say, provide an economic advantage for company. I mean, there is always a matter to differentiate the kind of the companies that we are analyzing, okay? Because incumbent companies that use a linear model have to redesign their production activity, their business model, and transform it from a linear to circular. New ventures and startup, when born, should already think about borning with a circular model.
I just want to add that, in fact, I agree 100% with what you said, because typically now the main focus is to find those green gold solutions, the ones that are able to provide good output in terms of sustainability, but also to help with the economic profit of those organizations. Then, more recently, the push has been towards enlarging the environmental area and to focus also on those sustainable development goals that are more about the social and the governance elements, so towards a more ESG perspective. This push is very much due to the new European Union legislation that is very much pushing towards that direction. So clearly they are now also looking at beyond the CO2 emission compression, because that was the main goal so far, looking at ways for increasing like the social sustainability, like gender equality, like the SDG number 5, or reducing inequalities, the SDG 10, and in general try to provide more opportunities for development of people as well. So these are the main things happening especially due to the pushes of the new legislation in Europe at the moment. And Italy is exactly going the same direction.
Very nice. Have you utilized tools or seen examples like material flow analysis to measure the circularity of SMEs? Margaret Camilleri from Malta.
We didn't measure circularity in this work.
Not in this paper.
Exactly, but we are now developing a dashboard for measuring circularity, as Andrea is leading on this project. So the plan is to use this dashboard for measuring circularity in future research works that we're working on. But that's absolutely correct. That's one of the limitations. We just assess the adoption of practices from the qualitative viewpoint without measuring how circular a company could be. But that's exactly one of the steps we are working on now.
Yeah, we have developed this tool, which is called Green Measurement Toolkit. So if you also want to go to the website of our lab, you may find this project. And you know, it takes a lot because you know it is not really easy to merge, I would say, the indicators that you find in literature with the needs of and the characteristics of small medium enterprises. So we had to adapt you know, anytime these indicators, and we are now in the phase of testing this measurement toolkit with a couple of companies that are close to our university, that have manifested, I would say, the interest to understand how they are positioned from the point of view of the circular economy.
How would you say these SMEs are ideally encouraged to implement circularity in their entire supply chain when their main issue is surviving economically and growing the business itself?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's mainly about what we discussed before. They need to find a compromise between investing, having the cash flow, and surviving, and being circular at the same time. So the starting point, what we always say, is they need to find the green gold solutions, because they need to find ways for making an impact on their economic balance sheet and also trying to be more sustainable. That's one thing. On the other part of the problem, you have legislation that, you know, sometimes pushes very much towards changing your current business practices towards more sustainable ones. Sustainable clearly from the theoretical viewpoint. Then I fully agree, one of the main concerns of these companies is to try and survive. So it's challenging. We always say try to start from the long-hanging fruit, so to make sure that you get some kind of savings along with more sustainable outputs as well.
But I also, let me add also this, I have a really strong position about what I'm telling you now, but this is, of course, my personal perspective. We do not have other alternatives. I mean, we do not have other alternatives. So the resources are not infinite ones. Okay, so we realize that the resources, the availability of that the amount of resources that we can exploit for satisfying the economic production, okay, is limited ones. So we have to change, okay, and we have to change our economy. And the small medium enterprises are, I would say, part of this transition, are a relevant, I would say, actor in this transition. Okay, so we have to create, I would say, the environment for allowing these companies for doing in a proper way the transition while maintaining their competitive advantage into the market. At least I think this is my, I would say, position about what we have to do from here to the future. I would say we have to change. We have to change. No alternatives.
And from what you guys very nicely provided in terms of fundamental information at the start of your presentation, the SMEs are a very big part of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe the most relevant. Maybe the most.
They're the backbone of the economy, actually, the real backbone.
How effective have the government policies been in encouraging the SMEs to implement circularity?
We talk a lot.
Yeah, exactly. There's been a lot of talking going on. Not much, in my opinion. probably because they were not these kind of policies that have not been designed, taking into account the reality of the real issues and problems of small and medium enterprises. Having this kind of blanket approach doesn't work really. So they should rethink in terms of governmental interventions. They should rethink the real grounding foundations of the mechanisms for small and medium enterprises and try to align more to this kind of needs, because providing funding is not enough.
Yeah.
You need to also increase the level of competence, the level of awareness, the level of visibility of the opportunities. Otherwise, I think it's hard for small and medium enterprises to go beyond what they typically do and what they typically think should be done. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I have, and following the argumentation of Alessandro, I have the impression that sometimes the ones that realize the policies have not ever seen how really companies work. Okay, so my suggestion is to take a few months to change their work a few months. Instead of doing policy, they go to companies to work for a few months, and then they come back and then they realize the policies. I think this could be the good cycle, for for allowing the companies to do the transition and to stay close to the company. If you do not know how the companies work, it does not make sense that you realize policies for supporting them. No.
Makes sense, yeah. Of all the 14 sectors in this study, which sectors do you think are most practical to implement circularity in their business operations?
I think those sectors where you have a stronger presence of the B2B channels, business to business channels, are more practical, because like the packaging sector, the chemical, where you have a less intermediated supply chain, a shorter supply chain, it's easier because they involved actors and players can see more rapidly the potential benefits of this kind of approach. In my opinion, where you involve also the consumers, like in the food industry or in the fashion industry, the role of consumers in closing first the loop and enabling, triggering the circular cycles, let me say, it's more complicated because you have also to convince the consumers they have a role in this. Sometimes there is a disconnect between what consumers do and what consumers think and what kind of perception they have of the difference they can make. So as long as they don't see a direct effect of what they do on the short term, it's hard to convince consumers. We have seen this also exploring simply the preferences of consumers when they go and shop online and they select some kind of different fulfillment and delivery preferences for getting the products delivered at home, for example. As long as they don't see the direct effect of their choices, they perceive their actions as transparent and not negligible. So it's a matter of convincing consumers in that case that they can make a difference. And I think this is less practical at the moment because it requires a change in mindset, which is quite strong. In this sense, some sectors are more practical and more mature because they've got a history of reusing materials also for environmental regulation purposes as well. That's my view.
We're running a little over, but we've got just two more questions, so we can cover those. If you can please comment about if this approach of butterfly diagram of circular economy can be utilized for tracing the carbon footprint for both SME and large enterprise, and then these results can contribute to designing CE framework from Musna Anam.
Yeah, may I?
Yeah, sure. Please.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think yes, because you have, in the center of the diagram, you have the traditional, I'd say, linear chain. So you can, you'd say, implement the traditional life cycle assessment techniques, for example, for evaluating the carbon footprint of the product from the, you'd say, its consumption until its usage. And you can, I'd say, make a comparison by using always the life cycle assessment techniques by calculating, I would say, the saving of emission that you may obtain by implementing the practices that are in the cycles of the diagram. So the idea could be to understand if, for example, the recycling activity, the remanufacturing activities, the refurbishing activities, and etc., may allow you to save, I would say, in some way, emissions compared to the emissions that you normally, I would say, produce in the traditional linear value chain that is represented in the diagram. So I think that you can use, I would say, life cycle assessment techniques for, I would say, also taking in mind, I would say, the butterfly, I would say, diagram. If I got the question properly, I would
No,
say.
I think so. I think so. Yes.
Okay.
And the final question to Dr. Andrea, by we, for creating the environment, did you mean the government?
Yeah, I said creating the effective environment for supporting the transition of small, medium enterprises, right? No, I mean, I would say not only the government, but I mean all the, I would say, players that can play a role for supporting this transition. There are not only companies in the environment that are called to do this transition, but for example, government is part of the game, but also financial stakeholders are part of the game. If, for example, the traditional, I would say, models for generating revenues, the direct commercialization, in a certain point are substituted by servitization models. This is something that calls the financial stakeholder to think about what the financial tools, right, to develop for supporting this servitization approach. So there is the society. So it is not, the transition does not only concern the production model, but also the consumption model. Okay, so we do not have to miss in this transition also the role of consumers, okay, because they are definitely really the ones that consume the product that are realized by the production world, and they represent really the ones that close in some way the loops, no, in the chain. So with the term we, I mean all the possible contributors in some way in this transition. So not only the government, but also other players.
We have a comment. I would like to thank Dr. Andrea and Dr. Alessandro for answering my questions. I certainly learned a lot from this short session. And I would also like to thank Andrea and Alessandro for joining us today. Thank you both so much for contributing to the program. It's been wonderful having you. So then that will bring us to a close for today. I will just very briefly provide the closing remarks. So a big thank you to Andrea and Alessandro. I think it was very clear from the questions that there was certainly a lot of engagement with the research. People are obviously interested, and obviously your presentation was obviously accessible and people were able to get something from it. So that was wonderful. Thank you. Not next week, but Thursday week, in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be speaking with Roland Gehr from the University of California at Santa Barbara. His presentation will be on the topic of curbside recycling increases household consumption. So that will be Thursday, the 9th of May, 2024 at 10 a.m. Pacific time. So once again, a big thank you so much, Andrea, Alessandro, and everybody that joined us today. I really hope that everybody enjoyed the program, and I will sign off until next time.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much.